everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 2 of the extended edition of Psychopath. So technically episodes 3 and 4 of season 1, but we're watching the extended edition, so it's crammed together, and I'm really excited. I liked the format of that last week. It was a great way to watch episodes 1 and 2 together. It led to a very lengthy discussion, which might be the trend of this series. So, but I'm super excited about it, right? I can't wait to see what that's like. So that is very promising. But I do have some comments before we dive into this first episode to note. It was told to me that I confused, not during the reaction, but during the discussion, I confused Kagari, who is the red-headed, orange-haired guy from the Enforcers, and Kunizuka, who is the girl with the black hair that may be messing around with Shion. So I confused them a lot in the discussion last week, so I'm going to try my best to not confuse them this week. I do have a little note card with their names on it, so if I need them for the discussion, I've got them, because there's a lot of names, and there's a lot of new characters to get to know in this series. So Sarah Linda pointed out that Genoza, who is the one with the bangs, I couldn't think of his name from Ouran High School Host Club. It's Kyoya. Kyoya from Ouran High School Host Club is who Genoza looks like. He looks like an adult version of him. So thank you, Sarah Linda. Anime Annie also pointed that out too. Thank you both for that note. Gin. I was talking a lot about how this seems to be referencing and plays off of Blade Runner. A lot of people have brought up RoboCop, Minority Report. I could see that as well. But I also mentioned Bungo Stray Dogs because I've watched that series and read the manga for it. And Gin noted that Psychopaths actually came out before Bungo Stray Dogs. And I was like, before the manga even started. And I was like, oh, so it could be that Bungo Stray Dogs was influenced by Psychopaths. So that's pretty cool. I kind of like that idea. I could definitely see it for sure. And then we'll talk about voice actors while we're on it, because Gin and Anime Annie pointed out a lot of different voice actors, noting that Kogame, who's our main guy, has the same. Kogame's voice actor is very talented and very multifaceted. They voice Panda from Jujutsu Kaisen, so that's not leaving my brain anytime soon. They also voiced them as well as Toji from Neon Genesis. There are a lot of Neon Genesis voice actors in this series, which I'm like, okay, good. But voices Toji from Neon Genesis, so explains why they're having a bad day a lot. As well as Kyo from Fruits Baskets and Carl from Monster. So those characters are vastly different. So I find that fascinating that their voice actor is he has the range. And then we also have Genoza has the same voice actor as Eiji from Banana Fish, and I was like, interesting. But also Eiji's voice actor is super diverse as well. They've also voices Natsuya from Free, as well as Milverton from Moriarty the Patriot. I was like, what is this range? There's like no typecasting here, which is exciting because I like the idea of characters not being voiced by typecast voice actors. Now, let's be honest. The one that's playing, what's his face? Shogo, the white-haired individual, is voiced by the same voice actor as Geto and Reagan. So, I mean, we'll talk about that when we get to him, if he shows up this episode or not. May not. I feel like he's one of those characters who's going to show up in episode 1 and then not show up till like halfway through the season. So we'll see about that. And then Kagari, who's our orange-haired character, is voiced by the same voice actor as Fyodor from Bungo Stray Dogs. There's a lot of Neon Genesis and Bungo Stray Dogs and Jujutsu Kaisen voice actors in this series. Not complaining. They have a good voice cast. But he voices him, as well as Kaoru from Neon Genesis. Just saying. And Gaara from Naruto. And the teacher from the Case Study of Vanitas. So I feel like that is a little bit more of a typecasted voice actor for Kagari, but Kagari seems like they're not a double agent at this point, so, and how can you be a double agent in Psychopaths? So I guess that we'll just go with that. And then Anime Annie talks about Akane, our main girl. She's voiced by the same voice actress as Lucy from Bungo Stray Dogs, which is fun, as well as Rika from Jujutsu Kaisen, which I could see that. I could definitely see those voices. Also, Masaoka, which is the older man. The only voice actor that Anime Annie noted was Jinrei Kuchiki from Bleach, which is like Byakuya's grandpa or uncle or whatever. So that's his voice actor. Shion, who is possibly having an affair with Kunizuka. Shion is voice acted by Suzuhara from Neon Genesis. So it's like you have Toji and Suzuhara as voice actresses and voice actors in the same series together, but I don't ship them, so fun times. as well as Kurapika from Hunter x Hunter. I was like, I know Kurapika, so that's fun. And then Kunazuka is voiced by Yuzuko from Buddy Daddies, as well as Tatsu's wife in Way of the House Husband. So, Anime Annie also noted this is a sign-in, and I was like, oh! I think Attack on Titan might be the... Let me rephrase that. I think Vinland Saga and Attack on Titan are the only two sign-ins I've really, like, legit categorized sign-ins I've watched in this series in my channel so far. So that's exciting. I like both of those series, and this series, it explains the brutality of it. Also lends that it will probably be brutal later on. So I'm like, aha. So just a thing to note. That makes sense too. And then they talked about the idea of Akane walking around their apartment being naked, like saying something about her personality, which, yes, that would be interesting if it's suggesting she's kind of shameless and bold despite seeming a little bit meeker in public, maybe. But I was thinking that it was that everybody walked around naked because of the way the clothing worked in this world, but who knows? Maybe that's something different. I guess we'll find out maybe more about the mechanics and the world building as we go. But I did agree with Anime Annie, and I think I talked about this in the discussion last week, that this series, the manga or the light novels or whatever, were around 2012 when this started. And now you compare it to 10 years later and like the post-COVID, how a lot of, people younger as well as older, people my age, younger, older, we cope with stress a lot worse, I think, than we did pre-COVID. So the idea of psychopaths and it like kind of being at a disadvantage to people who are mentally unstable seems to ring a lot more true now than I think it ever has before. So that's fun. That's a fun time. But yeah, I thought those comments were great. I'm really, really excited to dive into this series and get into it. And I like the idea of doing a 45-minute episode proper and then talking about it, having these back-to-back episodes. I think it will give us more time with the characters. It just seems like it's going to lend for a much better experience. So kudos. We'll have to soak it up while we can, right? Because seasons 2 and season 3 are not going to have the extended episode format. So what can we do? It's going to end up being like a 12 episode per season thing, but we'll just see what happens, right? So I'm super excited. I want to give a special shout out over to our philanthropy tier over on Patreon to thank them for supporting as I do these reactions. I really appreciate the support from YouTube, from Patreon, as well as the philanthropy tier. Y'all help me do what I like doing, and I appreciate that. So with that being said, I want to give a special shout out over to Alex Cornejo, to Anime Annie, to Anna, to Ashley Got Snow Bitches, to Be Happy, to Dana, to Destiny Marie, as well as Edgar, to Eric, to Kiri, to Loisige. I know I'm saying that wrong, but eventually I will get it right. You can comment and tell me how I'm mispronouncing it, please, so I can say it right. Matthew Palfinier, Nameless Monster, Saku, Shimuyama, Sunspots, Trails, Translucent Men, Tyrone, and Zachiel. Thank you so much for all of your support. I greatly appreciate it. All of my love. So yeah, I'm ready to start this, see what we get, and see what this fresh-faced Akane is going to deal with next on the job. Haha. But we're going to start Psychopaths Episode 2 Extended Edition, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. That episode had a lot going on. Both of those episodes, I was like, oh, we were about halfway through the first one. I was like, we actually have quite a lot to talk about. And then the second one happened. I was like, oh, we have a lot to talk about. I'm really enjoying this series because it's doing some really, really interesting things. There are some things where it's setting up like, okay, there's clearly history between these characters. There is clearly a fear that this character has or the other, and the one character is clearly warning that some stuff could happen, probably because I know from experience. So I'm so fascinated. And then our antagonist, Shogo, voiced by Ogeto there, there are so many Neon Genesis Jujutsu Kaisen voice actors in this one series. I'm like, they just call them all up whenever the series was, because this came out before Jujutsu Kaisen, but it came out after Neon Genesis. They just call up all the Neon Genesis voice actors being like, hey, you want to be in Psychopaths? And then after Psychopaths, they're like, hey, want to be in Jujutsu Kaisen? Because it's like so many of the same voice actors. I'm like, which the voice actor that plays Talisman, he's so typecast, I feel, as just being this bonkers character, that he's the one typecast. I find it so funny that before we started this reaction, I was like, oh, we'll probably not see Shogo till halfway through the season. Instantly in the first scene. And then I was like, well, none of the voice actors seem like they're typecast. And then instantly we get Talisman's voice actor, who's a very typecast individual. I will say, except for Alba. He plays Alba in Neon Genesis, who's like an extra. That was one of his first roles. So, but I was like, ah! So I had to look up what mnemonic means, because I've heard that term before. It's been a long time since I've taken a psychology class, but I do know what I have heard of mnemonic, which the floppy disk he has says Johnny Mnemonic on it. And I was like, what is this, Johnny Bravo? So I looked up mnemonic, and mnemonic is it's a device such as patterns of letters, ideas, or associations that assist in remembering something. For example, Richard of York gave battle in vain for the colors of the spectrum: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Which I'm like, that connects to the whole Psychopath thing with the hues and the colors. So the idea of mnemonic, it's also an adjective that means aiding or designed to aid the memory. So it's just like, it kind of like creates this Pavlovian response, I guess. We'll talk about it when we get to it. But that's what mnemonic means. So we're going to put that up here to talk about mnemonic. So just so we are aware, up here in the corner where you all can see, mnemonic is tied to memory. It's tied to memory and aiding in remembering. Which you could say that goes with the program of the computer, that it allows the drone to remember what it's supposed to do, and what it's supposed to do is dismember people. This show is not going to shy away from some grisly, bloody things. I'm real glad for the tomatoes in the blender, because I was like, we need something ridiculous as a metaphor, because I don't want to see this girl getting chopped up. And she knew Akane. So that's fascinating to me. I guess it doesn't matter now, but I guess it doesn't matter now that she knew her, but that is problematic, because it's like, well, we'll talk about that. If she knew, I guess we might as well put it up here, because we had Spooky Boogie, which I was so convinced that Spooky Boogie was connected to Shogo. And I'm sure that people will be like, well, but Spooky Boogie had a female avatar. I'm like, no, Shogo in that green sweater with that popped collar with those eyes that he gave Kogami in the first episode, that boy, I'm just saying, I don't think Akane's his type. I'm just saying. But yeah, we have Spooky Boogie, which poor Spooky Boogie getting murdered at the end of this episode, and the idea that they had went to school with Akane. Interesting. I feel like that might be a problem later on, because if Akane starts to try to find Spooky Boogie to question them further about Talisman, then they may trust Spooky Boogie because they went to school together and feel like there's a connection there. And then Shogo and this creep Zola, who's murdering people, could take advantage of that. So, and Akane is just naive enough that she might go along with it. And I'm like, ugh. So yeah. So I want to go back to this first conversation that Shogo has at the very beginning with the guy that has taken Talisman's place, right? With him. And so he starts out the episode. I'm going to refresh this. He starts out the episode talking about the Menant blah, that saying that if you throw a pebble into a pond, it creates ripples. In other words, it's like a domino theory or a butterfly effect. He says this is the domino that starts it all. We'll give those lost sheep a nudge in the right direction. Okay. So he's talking about the idea of lost sheep. So talking about lost sheep, and that the device, the floppy disk, is going to nudge into the right direction. Now the question is, who are the lost sheep? Are the lost sheep the people with their hues? Are they referring to like people who with clouded hues? Is it referring to that? Is it referring to the enforcers? Is it referring to Akane? what is it referring to? I would like to think it's referring to people who have clouded hues, and Shogo's like having this like savior complex in a weird way. But I don't know if that's the case, right? Let's see what else they have to say in this. I was too busy trying to recognize his voice, being like, oh, that's Shogo, to pay too much attention to the conversation. And he's like, sheep, huh? They may end up as guinea pigs, or they may turn into wolves. Yeah, so basically the people with clouded hues is who they're referring to. And they could either be guinea pigs and experiments that, don't yield anything other than data, or they could be wolves that could cause chaos. Which kind of ends up being what the one guy turns into. He turns into a wolf that tries to kill the enforcers. So I'm going to assume that they're at Shogo's house, and I'm just saying, I could see why Shogo's probably into Kogami, and I don't blame him. I'm into Kogami right now too, right? I'm more disturbed by this guy with the weird eyes and the puffer jacket. So he says there, he's like, we're doing this in order to find out which one it will be. In any case, it's ready now. Okay, what kind of strife will arise from it? And he's like, strife? And he's like, claw switch. He pointed out that no matter... So whoever Shogo is, Shogo talks about this person named Cloud Switch, who says that plans can easily go awry. And he brings up a really good point here. You can't just sit there and this is a very interesting philosophy too, because what he's saying, that plans can go awry, you cannot theoretically put a perfect plan into place. There are too many coefficients, too many factors that could make it go wrong. And that kind of ties to the whole psychopath system in a way, being like, yeah, sure, we have these guns that only react to certain things, that only fire under certain ranges. But technology, as we have seen in modern day real life, is not perfect and can be manipulated and can have glitches and can mess up. It's not infallible. And I think it's kind of interesting because you have Shogo's perspective seems to kind of be along the same perspective as Matsuoka, who is saying that, Matsuoka kind of does like the old-fashioned 1920s detective bit where he's like going across like human emotions and using like circumstantial evidence to like try to solve the crime, versus Genoza, who has a clear issue with Matsuoka, which we'll talk about, who is trying to say that it's all empirical and has to have full proof, right? We're going to talk about this a little bit more when we get into their characters. But he talks about how you can't just expect everything to go flawlessly. There is likely going to be something that can cause even the tiniest of setbacks. Regardless of how well thought out, armchair strategizing only works within the realm of theory. So he has this thing pulled up here, and it looks like online data, and we see this guy pulled up here, but we don't really know. None of it, his face doesn't match any of the characters that we know. So it seems like he's doing something maybe beyond the scope of these two episodes. Probably would not be surprised, right? Operations face all sorts of obstacles. They are the cause of strife on the battlefield. But what we're about to do will probably cause us some strife as well. Being like, we're going to be leading the enforcers to us. So us putting this plan into motion means we are very much exposing ourselves, which means someone could come along and try to stop us. So there's a risk for us as well in doing this. I'd be lying if I say I'm not looking forward to it even a little bit. The strife that will come from this crime. What will it be? A chance development? Will it be caused by the Sybil system? I'm curious about this guy. His eyes are like glowing. They're red with like a little light in the middle of them. He looks like he's like augmented or isn't fully human. I'm very fascinated by him and what the hell he is. So Shogo is saying, like, will the risks facing this crime be by chance? Will they be caused by the Sybil system? So he's like, is it going to be something systematic? Is it going to be something like weather related or beyond, the scope of what we can determine? And yeah, this guy with the weird eyes, what the hell? And he says, an organization or an individual. If it were to be an individual, it will be someone similar to us. Yeah, so if it's an individual that stops them or comes to stop them, it's going to be someone like-minded. Because again, like we point out here, Shogo is saying that if it's going to be somebody like Genoza, they're not going to suspect what Shogo is doing because it's beyond the realm of something that is theoretically outlined, right? It's beyond that scope of possibility. But someone like Matsuoka or Kogami is going to be like, no, this is something they could possibly do. And we know because we have a similar mindset. Yep. And then that's when we get to Kogami. Look, I'm not turning away man service any day of the week. No, thank you. I'm fine with this. This is all great. He reminds me a lot of Spike from Cowboy Bebop when he's like practicing here with getting himself ready. Although I'm getting Ray flashbacks from Buddy Daddy. Did they not give you any athletic equipment? Why do you have to practice in jeans? That would be uncomfortable. Maybe you're just getting used to doing work on the job and that's what you're going to be faced with then. So whatever. But I'm like, okay. He has a very Ray vibe from Buddy Daddy's there. And he's apparently in where it shows them in the basement because he's in the basement. And then we see Matsuoka in the basement as well, painting. So that it looks like they have their own like little hubs, their own places where they stay at in the basement area of the tower, which is interesting to me. But that seems to be the case. And then he just runs it over his head. I'm like, you could have gone and take a shower. And he has, what does it say? Yeah. What it says? Antarctic drops. It's not spelled right. But yes, you can push that hair back any day of the week, sir. Give us that Rin hand through the hair. I'm here. Give us that, please. He's very, very, when his hair is like out of his face, he's very handsome. I'm like, girl, Akane, do not blame you, girl, for being all up Kagami. I am here for it, let me tell you. But yeah, but then he goes into his conspiracy room where he has all of these different photos and things and articles taped up. So when we have, let's get our boy Kogami up here. He is clearly holding a grudge and has a vendetta against Shogo. He's met him before. Because we see all this up there and him looking with the cigarettes. I'm like, you just worked out and now you're going to smoke. That is the most counterintuitive thing you can do, but whatever. Again, that puts you in the psyche of Kogami. It's like kind of a toxic cycle that he's in. He's honing his body and doing some things right, but then there's habits that he has that are toxic to him, and he's not rectifying those, right? Rectifying them. And then, yeah, just has the cigarette afterwards. And looking at the board, like the conspiracy theory board. He just needs some couple threads and he'll be there. But yeah, and then Shogo, he sees him and crushes the cigarette in his hand, right? Crushes it in his hand. So there's a vendetta there, and it's something where that is what makes him, in some senses, what makes him a beast. And different than Akane. See, Akane, I think the big difference is that, Kogami has a vendetta. There's a grudge. There's some reason there why he's pursuing why his overarching goal is pursuing someone like Shogo. And he talked about that in the first episode, that he has something he needs to do. He needs to find Shogo and kill him because of what he's done in the past. Whether or not the incident of episode 1 is from the past or future, we'll find out by the end of this, I'm sure. But that's what drives him, and that's what keeps him a criminal, is just that idea of revenge. Akane doesn't have any of those thoughts in her head. She's not having revenge against anybody. So it's easier for her to get out of the mindset and keep a healthier mindset because she doesn't have the urge to have revenge against anybody. But we're going to talk about that. So I really like the OP. Feel like I'm going to talk about it a while. It gives lots of Neon Genesis vibes, especially with, these half-naked bodies and people swimming towards each other. It's very shippy. For Akane and Kogami, which they're very shippy in these episodes. I'm here for it. My shipper heart is not complaining whatsoever. Give me more. But so yeah, so they're going over all this place, this automation auto line here is fascinating to me because they're talking about how it's like the third recent death, so it's highly suspicious, but the company is playing it off as if it's no big deal. Like, oh, it's a dangerous work environment. Things like this happen all the time. There's so many tie-ins to our modern world right now in this episode that I was just sitting there going, "Oh my god, this is not." And then when they put down what's his face? Shogo put down George Orwell's 1984. I was like, "Holy shit, we're really getting meta and on the nose here, aren't we?" We'll talk about 1984 when we get to that scene in the book, or in the episode, but. I mean, the idea of a factory having dangerous working conditions and people dying in it and them not changing their practices, you would think that sounds crazy, but then look at Amazon, right? Look at what's happened with them and their poor working conditions. I mean, how many documentaries have been done about it? And nothing's really changing. So, and it's all about profit, right? The thing that is probably the most unsettling in this is the idea that they are working in this job, right? They're working like 50 people working on all these drones in different departments. And the fact of the matter is they have to live there because it's such a demanding job. They have to live there. They don't have access to the internet, so they have no real source of entertainment and outside of talking amongst themselves and creating scuffles and whatever. And they're isolated, and there's just this sense of, no contact with the outside world. So it would be natural that cabin fever would develop, right? That you could develop cabin fever. And the problem is when there's no other source of entertainment and no culture there, then they develop this kind of toxic culture amongst themselves where they find one person a scapegoat and they're the bully that gets bullied until they get shuffled around, and then they'll find someone new. So it's a really bad environment. The whole lack of internet thing, they try to explain it as saying that it's because they don't want to be hacked. And that's interesting to me because that's like something like, well, you have all this technology, but yet your workers don't have any technology. There was multiple things going on in this one scene. You, have the idea of these people isolated, overworked, and they seem to be living a very mundane life. The threat of cabin fever, the fact they're scapegoating people to satisfy getting that primordial like urge, to just shoot out that aggression out of there. It's like a big human social experiment. But then it says something for the poor working conditions, whereas the president is like, well, but it's because it's dangerous and because we could get hacked, and then what could happen to these workers, and which sounds so crazy, but then you think, well, no, that could realistically happen. It's kind of insane. The weirdest part about it is in this world building, it's established that these people are here because the Sybil system has placed them here, because this seems to be where their lot in life is and what they're most apt for. And Kogami kind of flips it on his head because the one guy's like, well, these people are suited for these positions. Of course their hues are fine. And Kogami's like, yeah, and you're in the position you're in because your personality suits someone that would take advantage of stuff like this. And I was like, mic drop. Thank you, Kogami. Oh my God. But it's kind of crazy. And it's one of those things where you kind of wonder, like, the people that work in this factory are probably single. That seems to be the case. A lot of the people that go crazy in this, and I say go crazy as in their hue gets clouded and they end up committing crimes, the majority of them seem to be people that are isolated, that aren't in relationships, and that are alone or desperate in some sense of the word, which makes sense. But that seems to be the case. You don't really see, so far we haven't seen any couples or people in relationships that have a high crime coefficient. Seems to be the case, right? And that's going to be the question, like, is the reason that Kogami after Shogo is because someone they had a relationship with was killed? I don't know. And so Genoza says that they can't use well, he doesn't exactly say it, but we find out that they can't use the dominators inside the building because of the lack of Wi-Fi. And it's like, that's not suspicious at all. I honestly thought the president was super suspicious. I was waiting for them to do a scan of him, but it turns out it was the guy that was scapegoated. And that kind of is something that's really sad, is that, Akane, she has this bright-eyed outlook on everything. And she's like, well, we shouldn't judge him just because he seems like the obvious answer. And then he is the answer. And it's like, oh, well, now what do we do, right? Because I was fully expecting it to be the president and there to be some kind of twist. And it's like, mm-mm. And the fact that Kogami, he is so used to, he is very tainted by the job and the system. Like, he's able to think like the criminals themselves to the point where he knows exactly how and why they committed the crime. And honestly, that makes me a little bit scared because I'm like, if this psychopath was in the real world, every person that's been watching true crime is in danger. It's like, all these people have been watching true crime documentaries and knowing how people kill one another. You are a target now. And it's like, oh no. But yeah, Akane is just like, I feel like the story is setting up Akane that she is going to become one of the hunting dogs by the end of this series. Maybe not this season, but I feel like by the end of the series, because Genoza seems very, very, very worried about her. And he keeps trying to say, he's like, you're taking the fool's path. You're thinking like Matsuoka and Kogami. Those two individuals are hunting dogs now. Neither of them were originally criminals. They were detectives. And then they crossed over for whatever reasons. You're on the same path. And Genoza's like, you need to not be on the same path. You're too bright for that. Are you going to be able to stay in control, or are you going to become one of the dogs themselves? And so far she seems okay. But Genoza is just like, are you talking about being their colleague or their handler? Like, fools learn from experience. I hope you're not a fool. So there's that idea, right? The idea of fools learn from experience. In this, and usually experience is viewed as a good thing, but in this world, if you experience life as a criminal and see things through a criminal's eyes, you are going to be viewed as a criminal as well by the system. That's just how it works. And she's just like, that's not going to be me. But I'm like, I don't know. So Genoza seems worried. He not only seems worried about Akane and fears that she's following the same path, and he seems like he's trying to follow the path as far away from it as possible because he doesn't want to end up like them. But he also has beef with Matsuoka. And he has history with Kogami. I mean, the point that Kogami said Gino, I was like, oh, you guys are on like a nickname basis. You guys have worked together in the past. You have history. But Genoza is just so... And I feel like Genoza only stays with that group because he cares. Because he's not ready to fully have closure and get away from them. Which is what it is, right? It's very interesting. But yeah, this whole setup, it's pretty bad. And then to the point where Kagari and Matsuoka are like, yeah, this is a murder. We knew right off the bat it was a murder because we know how this works. And Akane, she's trying to give everything the benefit of the doubt, and that's just not the case. It's pretty grisly what happens to these individuals, right? And it's clear they're the ones that were bullying the one guy. So what's interesting is like all of the stuff in this scenario is so suspicious. Like they can't, like the information inside the drones has been wiped. Of course it has been. They could take it back to Shion, but it's probably not going to do anything. It all looks like accidents. Genoza kind of asks them, maybe we could suspend production to test everybody and do like a random drug screening, a random psychopath screening on all these people. But the president's like, well, that will slow down production and then we won't make as much money. No, we don't want to do that. And Akane's like, well, there's people's lives at risk. And he's like, well, it's a dangerous job. They knew it was dangerous. But the thing that's so messed up about that is that they didn't have a choice. This was like the job they were assigned. So it's like, yeah, it's a dangerous job, but they don't even care about the well-being of their people. And it's like, this is very real and very, very problematic. But yeah, what's interesting is that I like that we get the little detail of Kogami looking at all the videotapes, right? He has all the videotapes that they're looking at. Like he's scanning the area and looking at what's going on to kind of get a layout of the entire facility so that they could escape and get to where Kagari and Kunizuka could help them. But yeah, I really like Matsuoka. Matsuoka's grown on me a lot in these episodes. He's like the hardened cop that now he's being lumped in with the criminals just because he cared too much and he got in too deep. And I feel like that's what Genoza is afraid of, is that they're going to get in too deep. So that Akane is going to get in too deep and then she's not going to be able to get out, right? And so I like that we get a little bit more world building. We find out that typically analyses that are taken from the Sybil scanner, there's so many analyses being done on a daily basis that there's a backlog. And it's like, that is so true to life. It's like all this bureaucratic red tape that's out there, like, oh, well, we'll just put the file on top of the other files and we're slowly scanning them, but there's a never ending pile and you never know when it's going to come back. And the Dominator like supersedes all that and instantly cuts to giving you an analysis right then and there, which is fascinating. And I like that. I like that world building a lot. There's kind of like a shortcut that they take, because if you have a serious crime, you've got to cut through the tape and get to it. But Genoza, you know, points out to her that, I like the conversation they have with Genoza and Akane, where they're talking about, like, she asks what the deal is with him and Matsuoka. And, Matsuoka tells her that based on the victim's condition, his intuition tells him that it was a grudge. And that's what it ends up being. That's the thing, is that it ends up being a grudge that he had against the bullies in the workforce. But Genoza didn't want to recognize that. And the conversation him and Akane have, where he's like, we have to look at this systematically, and we cannot instantly assume with circumstantial evidence without finding proof. He reminds me a lot, Genoza reminds me a lot of L from Death Note. Genoza's kind of like L, where L had intuition in that series about things, but L was also about, without spoiling anything with Death Note, finding substantial proof. We don't make any assumptions, we don't do any actions until we have concrete evidence. And that seems like Genoza is like that on steroids. Whereas in Matsuoka's case, he's like, no, we can make assumptions. He's like another character in Death Note, but I won't spoil it. He's like, no, we can make assumptions and go with them, and we'll probably be right, because he's thinking the same way a criminal does. And Akane is learning from experience by being around them, but the more she's around them, I feel like if she doesn't, because the handler's job is to keep them in check. And so far, Akane's not really done that. She's just been learning from them. She's not keeping them in check. And so I am afraid, like Genoza is, that she's going to end up, it's going to affect her crime coefficient, and she's going to end up becoming one of the hunting dogs just because of being around them. It's going to rub off on her, that crime coefficient. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that won't happen. Who knows? And so what's interesting is she questions, she's like, why after he murders would his like crime coefficient stabilize? And she doesn't understand like that someone could find stress relief after using violence. There's going to be a lot of deep conversations brought up with this, I'm sure. I also like in the cafeteria, there's this beautiful scenic painting of trees, and like Kagari's like enjoying the food and having a great time. Like all of the hunting dogs don't seem to be at all bothered by what they're seeing, but Akane's like, this is kind of messed up. I do like that Kogami like gets up and helps the guy, which is so fascinating, because later on, it's like he realizes that the guy is the killer. Kogami is so interesting, because in this moment, he helps out the guy, and you can't help but feel like Akane being like, look at him, what a gentleman, look at him. But then she notes that when he is fighting the drone, and when he's, you know, when he figures out that that man's the murderer, it's like it changes in an instant, and he becomes this like beast. And she's like, I feel like Akane likes herself a bad boy. And girl, I understand. In literature, I'm the same way. Not in real life, but in literature, I'm like, oh, I like a little bit of a bad boy. In literature, so Kagami is like right up my alley. But I feel for her wanting to understand Kogami, because she's like, we're coworkers. She's treating him like a colleague, not like a handler, which is Genoza's fear. But she wants to know his true character. And Matsuoka's like, well, look, the only way you're going to know his true character is to get on his level. And if you get on his level, you're going to become one of us. So you might want to think twice about that. I feel like Matsuoka's not trying to turn away the ship, but he's saying, girl, if you get on board this ship, you ain't getting off. It's Hotel California. So you need to decide now, are you willing to go into the darkness with us and learn how we tick? Because you may not come out. And I'm like, I don't know. And maybe she can. Maybe she can get to know him and then her crime coefficient still be fine. I don't know. I just like that Matsuoka is trying to explain the situation here, and Genoza's having none of it. He's like, we've found the pattern, we know who it is, and Genoza's like, this is not how we conduct business. And it's just, he's like, back in the days when we didn't have scans, something like this was really uncommon. So they haven't had the Sybil system for very long. Like, and by very long, I mean they probably had the Sybil system for 20 years, 15, 20 years, 30 years at the most. Because Matsuoka seems like he's in his 50s. So if he was younger on the force, he'd probably be in his 20s or 30s. So the Sybil system is probably not more than 20 years old, maybe. And this is when Genoza gets really upset. And he's like, get real. The detective intuition that you guys always talk about, you're deluding yourselves. It proves latent criminals like you are trash of society. And Matsuoka kind of looks away like, oh, kid, this again? So yeah, I feel like Genoza, deep down, Genoza probably would be a hunting dog, but he's trying so hard to not be a hunting dog, to not have that crime coefficient. I feel like Genoza in his heart wants to believe Matsuoka and knows Matsuoka is correct, but he's trying his hardest to be he's trying his hardest not to become part of the system like Matsuoka and Kogami are, to keep his head above water, so he has to constantly tell himself that that's not true. And Matsuoka just has this look on his face like, who are you fooling? You know? Like, okay, come on. But he doesn't look mad at him. He just looks kind of like, Kagari looks like they've had this conversation and argument so many times. He's so bored. He's like, we can't act on circumstantial evidence. He's like, no, our job is to maintain orderly society based on the coefficient judged by Sybil. He's like, we're just doing our jobs. And then I like these, like, well, 3 people have died in a year, so what order is being maintained? And Kogami's like, Gino, let me do it to see if he's the one or not. And then he's like, and Gino just gets mad. And I like that Connie's like, can I speak to you? You're getting really upset by this. So can you explain? Of course, they don't tell us what's going on. They don't tell us what the beef between Matsuoka and Genoza is. In fact, Kagari and Kunazuka are like, oh, you asked him? Oh, why'd you do that? Oh, no. So it seems like it's something deep-rooted between them, and it's probably a big deal, but it's probably not a big deal to the point where it's going to affect their relationship in this squad. The others are just like, oh, this old beef, you asked him about that? Why did you do that? So I'm a little mad the show didn't tell us, but that's okay. I will kindly wait until the show gives us answers. Fine. May's telling her she's taking the fool's path. And the look in his eye, if you're a fool, so like a fool, you should learn through experience. There's a little bit of tint of red in his eyes, so I'm so curious. So curious what we're going to get, and he stays out of it. Yep. And so she's like, oh, Kogami, you're just going to talk to him, right? But no, he antagonizes him. And he's like, well, if he's going to kill us, then this is his chance. And he's like, well, this place is out of range, so I'm going to head for it. Kogami's a good actor. He's a good actor, and he knows how a criminal mind works. And so he's like, well, if he's not the person who did it, then we're safe. But if he is, then we're going to have this thing attack us. And that's exactly what happens. And he's like, he doesn't have time to prepare for things in advance. So he'll have to use the same MO he did before. And that's how he proved the crime. And so, yep, that's the mnemonic. He has the thing that Shogo gave him. And Kogami's proven right. Mm-hmm. I liked the chase scene. I liked the idea that we found out that the Dominators have a destroyer function that just literally obliterates anything. That's interesting to note because I thought the Dominators were just for people, but no, they can destroy like actual things that are in your way. So that's helpful and terrifying at the same time. So fun times with that. But yeah. And then I am glad though that they did just knock him out. They didn't actually like kill him. They just knocked him out so he would be taken in. And Akane is just like, he looked like a carnivore that had cornered his prey. He was a savage beast when he was plunged into a crisis. And so then we cut to her. What I like about the extended editions is that we instantly transition into the next episode without the ED. So it feels like a flowy transition. And so we cut to her like on her bedroom floor with her pillow. Like not on her bed, on the damn floor. She's having a moment of crisis where she's like, our primary concern is towards maintaining a healthy psychopath because we've internalized the ideology of the Sybil system. So she's like, I have been taught that we have to follow protocol to maintain order. Akane is not the person that Shogo is afraid of ruining their plans. He thinks that like her and Genoza, they can work through the system and work underground and behind the scenes and not be affected by people like her. But people like Kogami, who have the like instinct to detect crime, they're the ones that think like Shogo and the ones that Shogo's worried about. So, but she's like, having this moment of being like, well, but I want to work with Kogami, but I need to understand him. But if I understand him, I'm kind of going against everything I've learned from school. She's like, do I have a rebellious period? Do I sow my wild oats? It could end up getting me stuck in this hunting dog thing forever. And she's like, I felt something totally different. Not the fact that he's a latent criminal, but he started out as part of the Sybil system. But while he was fighting a criminal, he was like something else. She's like, he knows the system and knows it in and out, but when he was fighting a criminal, he was someone completely different. And when she asks, what does it mean to be strong? She's like, is it gonna take a monster to fight a monster? Is essentially what it's getting at. Is that what we have to have? There's a part of me that sees her going down the path of becoming a latent criminal, but then there's the other part of me that wants her to not be. I want her to kind of beat the system. I want her to be the prodigy or the special one that can beat the system. But I don't know if that's going to happen or not. We'll have to find out, won't we? So yeah. And she's like, his strength is more anachronistic and classical. I was like, no wonder Shogo likes him, right? And so I felt it was dangerous to even think about him. But I like how she says this. It was dangerous to think about him, but running away from the situation isn't acceptable. So she's like, look, I know it's dangerous to even think about him because that coefficient could rub off on me, but ignoring him is not solving the problem. So I can't just run away. I need to do something, but what? So that's so interesting. So her solution is go to a virtual reality tarot card reading. So we get Talisman, the Talisman Saloon. Lemonade Candy is her avatar name. What a name for Kane, Lemonade Candy. I feel like that seems highly appropriate. She's, Lemonade Candy, but lemons can be sour, so fascinating. There's like a little sourness there under the surface. Interesting. But yeah, I like the idea of the avatars and like the content, like the content creators. Again, we connect to social media, and now this was created before, like, I feel like content creators were a big thing like they are now. And so the idea of an avatar, and they talk about public opinion, they talk about popularity, they talk about like when you go into decline and comebacks, they talk about all sorts of things. It's kind of insane, right? Like, what the heck? What kind of concerns are your friends contending with? And we see all the avatars, right? I love that she goes and she literally asks for like dating advice with Kogami. I'm glad they didn't have to. For a hot second, I thought they were going to have to like replay the tape of her like confession and Kogami like, who are you talking about? And her being like, I don't know. And that may end up happening. But interestingly enough, this was this morning. So the person she was talking to is the guy that is with Shogo. Isn't that interesting? Discard the preconception and then face his true character. Which I'm like, is that the advice that he gives her about confronting the true character is essentially advice that Matsuoka says would make her become more like a dog. So which would kind of check with Shogo and this one guy and their objective to try to create more chaos and anarchy in the Psychopath system. We'll see how that goes, but that's so intriguing. The difficulties experienced by those adrift. Huh. And then she like lifts up. I like that she has jellyfish everywhere. Like that's her MO. Again, jellyfish, they're transparent. They're very transparent. You can see through them, but they also sting. They also have a bite to them. I'm like, they can be poisonous, which is a fascinating animal motif for her. So yeah, then we go to Matsuoka. The person she talks about facing his true character. I like that in his spare time, in Kogumi's spare time, he like kickboxes and works out and gets more hot. In Matsuoka's spare time, he paints. And he's a painter, which means he's very emotional and tied to his emotions, which would explain why probably it was easier for the crime coefficient to rub off on him because he's a more emotional individual. Usually if you're someone that's artistic or has like ties to artwork and poetry, you feel emotions more. So that would explain why he's so tied to, why the crime coefficient maybe latched onto him more often than not. And so someone told him to understand her better. And I like that she said my two options were, she's like, I was told by someone to think that he's not a human like us. And he's like, oh, well, that would have been Genoza. It's just like him. Which is so, I can see why Matsuoka would be bothered by Genoza, because here's Matsuoka doing a very human thing, like painting a picture, doing something that seems so simple. And yet Genoza doesn't recognize him as a human anymore because he's a latent criminal. And then you have Shogo's lackey telling her to get to know him rather than distance himself. So, I mean, that delineation there is really clear, right? I want to know what's up between Matsuoka and Genoza, but I know I'm going to find out eventually, so it's just a matter of time. Dogs are dogs and owners are owners. A relationship which you only stick to your side is best. Matsuoka is trying to... What's so hilarious is that Genoza is worried that Akane is going to go over to the side of the dogs. And Matsuoka is literally telling her not to. He told her back last episode when she was like, so am I just supposed to stay back and just order you around and you guys take care of things? And he was like, yes, because if you try to work with us, there's a chance it's going to rub off on you and you're going to be stuck working with us forever. Don't want to do that. So I feel like Matsuoka's trying to tell her, like, don't become one of us. Don't get to know him that well. It's okay. He's fine. He's making it work. Just leave us alone. You know, that's what I think is best for you. And then she kind of looks at him like, oh, was that a slip up? Did you mean to say that? And he's like, He's like, understanding Kogami means that you see things like Kogami does and do things like him. If you are able to do that, your psychopath number will be the same as his, and you don't want to do that. Kogami stared into the darkness too long. Even now, he's still staring at it. The only true justice in the world exists in the depths of that darkness. So yeah, there's this concept that he believes that his answers are only in the darkness. Like, he's not going to be able to move on until he kills Shogo. And obviously, the intent to kill someone is upsetting the psychopaths, and that's why his hue is constantly clouded. So, yeah, he's like, he got too far into the darkness, and now he can't get out. He's like, I don't think that you should be put into that same situation. If you want to go searching for something like that with him, then you've got it. There's nothing I can say. I can't stop you. I couldn't stop Ko either. So yeah, so I feel like Matsuoka has known Genoza and Ko for a long time, and he couldn't stop Ko from going into the darkness and going down that path. And I feel like Genoza, in response, probably steered as hard away from it as possible. But it's to the point where it's put a distance between him and Matsuoka. So I want to know more about their past so bad, but I know we're going to find out. So it's just a matter of time. It's fine. So then we get something's happened. There's a call from Genoza, and she leaves. And she's like, well, Kunozuka and I are off duty, so go with Kogami and Kagari. And we see like what it appears like they all have the same basement setup. At least he has a window. I guess he's not in the basement. At least he's got a window and it looks like a decent apartment. And he's just a painter there. I love Matsuoka. He's my favorite so far. I mean, Kogami is great, but I do like Matsuoka a lot. So yeah, so they go to this apartment. And the whole reason was that the toilet has been broken the past 2 months, but nobody's filed a complaint. The management company became suspicious and reported it. So that's interesting that it's Hayama, where they pull up his face on here. Yeah. Hayama, he was 32, single and unemployed. And I like when Akane's like, unemployed? Does anybody in their 30s unemployed exist nowadays? I was like, oof. The realness, Akane, the realness. But that does say something again for the world building, because it's establishing this idea that in this society, you are typically not unemployed in your 30s. You all have a job and a duty in this system to do so. Because Kagari's like, well, he's making all this content. He had like an affiliate service provider, meaning he was getting like money from YouTube or something. You can make money if you're popular on the internet. Of course, you'd feel it's stupid to go outside and work. I like that Kagari's like, well, if you're a content creator making all this money on the internet, why would you go get a job? I was like, oh man, the realness here. And so then we see his like setup, his 3 laptop setup. When a person goes out of their apartment. This part was creepy because Genoza says when a person goes out of their apartment, there's a record left in the scanners. That is terrifying to me. That's like Big Brother, right? Again, we're going to talk about 1984 with Shogo reading 1984 there. That sounds very Big Brother, where it's like, oh, you can't go anywhere without being watched. You can't leave your apartment, go in the streets without there being a record of it. Which on the one hand sounds like, oh, well, the police or somebody could use that to help you. But on the other way, it's like freaking surveillance and it's creepy, right? And it like severely limits your freedom of where you could go as people. It's very disturbing. But yeah. So in this town, it's impossible to take a trip without leaving any trace. And Akane's like, well, what do we do? So when they do the hollow, I love the idea of doing the hollow and the couch was moved. And so then they find the scratch in the floor and they all look at it. And then Kogami like sees the tape and he's like, I've already solved the case. I know exactly. And he's thinking like Shogo and them. This is what they would do. And this is how the case is solved. To a disturbingly accurate degree, right? Like Kogami's seen so many murders at this point that he knows exactly how to deduce. He's like Sherlock in that sense, but like a jaded Sherlock, you know? And Genoza just looks into this, it looks at him like, okay, Sherlock, you figured it out. And he's like, actually, I have. And he did. Like they cut him up and flushed him down the toilet in the sink, which is disturbing, by the way. And I just love how disgruntled Genoza is. He's just like, you just think you're so special. And so then the commu field, and Akane's like, I saw him this morning. I do love the little Neon Genesis nod with Shion. Shion putting the cigarette in her mouth and the lipstick coming off on the cigarette. It's something that's very Neon Genesis with the female scientist character in that series that is also blonde and also a lesbian. So I'm just saying, her and Kunizuka shipping hardcore. So they talk about how the person that was playing Talisman likely used a lot of auto-detective proxy settings and ways to hide their IP, which is kind of like to their detriment now because they've been hiding their IP, they can't be hacked on the plus side. On the downside, if somebody decided to murder them and take over their IP, then the authorities couldn't detect it. So it's like the perfect way to hide your tracks without it being synced up, right? And then I like Shion's like, but hey, at least the person using Hayama's avatar should think that they haven't aroused any suspicions, so we should be able to find them, right? And so they determine whoever's doing it is walking around right in front of them. They're not trying to hide anything. I like that when Akane and Genoza go to see talisman who has like the smiley face and the sad face, which is comedy and tragedy on them, and they have like the sun and the moon. Very mystical. I like that Akane has her little jellyfish human avatar, and Geno's is a damn dime. He's a 10, ladies. He's a dime piece. I'm like, what? But I'm like, it's just so ridiculous. I love that it's just an American dime. It's so weird. And so they follow him, and then we get Spooky Boogie, which is the creepiest thing, like hanging from the rafters, being this anarchist and challenging Talisman to a duel. Now, I like that we have the chat with Lemonade Candy and Spooky Boogie set up in the chat room. I was getting very Toilet Bound Hanako-kun vibes from this chat room because it was like in this bathroom and all the faucets are on and it's like kind of like water torture, like the water's just slowly rising, but it's like cutesy with lily pads and everything. The cutesy creepiness of it was giving me like a Hanako-kun vibe. And then the bow tie is the safety pin for Spooky Boogie. And they're like, you're famous. I'll treat you at our class reunion. What business does inspector at the CID have in my commu field? So what's interesting is that at this point, Spooky Boogie has not been murdered yet. So the question is, like, how did she know Akane? But the fact that she knew Akane from before, would suggest that she had gone to school with her. But that, again, like I said, it's going to make it hard because now Akane might trust Spooky Boogie, not realizing they've been killed, and give information to them. And then that would be giving information to Shogo. So WTF, right? That's just going to make things really, really weird. So what ends up happening is that they decide to do this like party. That they're going to do this party. And they talk about how Talisman was an old-time avatar on the decline. But they've gone back to being their regular self, which seems a little bit suspicious. And it's hard for them to make a comeback. So to do this investigation, we need to find out the person that's using the avatar. And I was like, I feel like Spooky Boogie's like, well, that's kind of interesting. That's kind of chaotic. Let's do it. Let's do something with that. To get a fast-track bureaucrat in my debt, right? That should be fine. It's kind of unexpected for an anarchist to help us. And they're like, well, that's my public face and this is my private face. And that's what Talisman calls them out on. But I think that's so fascinating that we have this concept of the public versus private, right? Because, again, it ties back to the idea of the corporation in the first part of this episode, where on the outside it seems like this drone factory and everybody's working there, but their crime coefficients are all fine, so everything's hunky-dory. And then behind closed doors in the private, you find out, no, they're scapegoating people and bullying them to relieve tension, and it's actually a pretty messed up system. And here, Spooky Boogie is like, well, in public, yeah, I'm an anarchist. That's my avatar. I can do whatever I want with my avatar. That's what people know me as. But privately, I'm not above getting some government cheese, you know? And that's so true, right? Because when we see people on the internet, we think that they are a certain way sometimes, and that's not always the case. You know, I talk a lot on my channel. I talk for hours and hours about shows like this one. In private, I don't talk a lot. I'm not a big talker when I'm by myself, obviously. Or when I'm in small groups, I'm usually the one listening. I'm not a big talker when I'm in big groups. When I'm in big groups, I'm usually listening. I might have conversations with like one or two people extensively, or if I'm on a road trip, I'll talk. But if I'm like in a big group of people, I'm usually the quiet one that's like sitting back listening to what people are saying. So again, public versus private. It's interesting. And it's like, for those who come to my forum to show appreciation, we're going to have a ball, a rather modest party. And then I'm going to challenge Talisman to a duel over the white crown that I'm holding. And of course, Shogo and them who've killed the real Talisman at this point are like, okay, well, let's figure out what's going on. Let's see what we can do. And so they're holding this party, and everybody uses holo cosplay that matches their avatars on the social network. And I like that Matsuoka's like, kids these days, cosplay, holo cosplays, what's this all about? I think that's freaking cool. I like the idea that it's all of these like content creators and people in their avatars showing up. It's like they're going to a convention, right? Essentially. And she's like, that's how we could find Talisman and apprehend them. Kids come up with strange things these days. And they're like, will Talisman show up? I like there's like a globe game of chess behind Kogami that Kagari just randomly has along with some bowling pins. What? And she's like, yeah, in this situation, if he's absent, his popularity will plummet, so he will show up. No matter who's pretending to be Kimihiko Hayama, they're going to be there. And Genoza's like, well, this makes sense, so let's do this. It's a win for us because what's the worst that could happen? So the drones are in the back. So it's like a modern day masquerade party, and we see all these people showing up. I like the commentary that happens at this point where they're like getting cooped up in a small place, not knowing who everyone else is. Like, do these guys, don't they feel uneasy? And that's such an interesting thing, right? That's such an interesting thing. And it is kind of meta because when you go to a convention, you're with like a bunch of people you don't know. Most of you are all in cosplay, so you're not really dressed as yourselves. So everybody's a stranger. And then you see like parties and stuff and concerts and stuff like that. And it's like, don't they feel uneasy? But I'm like, if you go to a concert, you're with a bunch of people you don't know either. So it's like, it's kind of the same thing, sort of, only you're not in a costume. And Akane's like, well, you can't participate in the social networks if you're afraid of anonymity. If you're going to be famous and you're going to have, accolades, and you can't be afraid people knowing who you are. And Kogami's like, well, this isn't virtual. This is real. People could get killed. And Akane's like, well, that's just kind of part of it. And yet they don't even know who's right next to them. They're out of their minds. It's like, well, yeah, it does when you put it like that. It does make it kind of weird, right? And Akane's like, well, your psychopath gets cloudy if you think that way. And I like that first she's like, she like calls them out. She's like, well, because you're doubtful and a negative Nancy, that's why your psychopath is always clouded. And she's like, oh, never mind. Sorry that I said that. And I like that Kagane's like, He's like, no, that makes sense. I like that he instantly like just acknowledges her, like, no, you're right. I'm aware. It's fine. And that's when Matsuoka notices that they're there. The talisman has shown up. So yeah, so she goes out there in the outfit, and that's when we see our guy here with the ladies. And that's when he notices that something's popped up, that there's an intruder. I knew it. And he like just shoves the girl aside wearing that stupid puffer vest, that puffer jacket. He shoves the ladies aside and goes over and gets the phone out and says, Mr. Mito, you were right. A dominator is detected on the floor. A detective is mixed in there. And they're like, it was a trap by Spooky Boogie. Now, he's like, of course you're going to get away, right? Like, I want to know what's up with his eyes. Why are his eyes red with the glow? It'll cause a problem if you get captured. So Mito, and he's like, I have unfinished business too. Interesting. And this guy's like, I'll help you. So we have this red-eyed guy that is voiced by Alba's voice actor. The red-eyed guy. We have him. I'm curious about him. And then we have Mito, who I think is the one that kills Hayama and Spooky Boogie. And then we have Shogo. So Mito is the murderer here, and this guy in the blue jacket and Shogo are the ones assisting him for whatever reason. And so, yeah, they cause this big problem where everything gets jammed, and sure enough, everybody's costumes get changed, and it causes this big, giant uproar. And the thing about it is, whenever this happens and all of this chaos ensues, then what happens is that everybody gets freaked out, and of course their crime coefficients go up because they're stressed. So it's like, it's just a big disaster, right? They got us. And I like that Genoza does not seem surprised. I like that Matsuoka catches, like, Akane, she gets caught by him. And then everybody in the Avatar world is asking Spooky Boogie what's up. It was a raid. And then Talisman points out that Spooky Boogie was responsible from it. And of course, they get freaked out. And Talisman calls out like how she's been working for the government. You're no longer Spooky Boogie. You're not qualified to be an avatar loved by everyone. And he's like, I know more about you than you yourself do. So then we go back to her room, which again, public versus private. Like everything is like reds and pinks and like her outfit and everything. It looks like Alice in Wonderland. These creepy. Yeah, so whoever this Mito guy is, he has beef with the avatars, not only with Talisman, but with her. So Mito clearly has a grudge or something against them. And it seems like Shogo and the guy in the blue jacket are taking advantage of that and using him to commit the crimes for them and cause more anarchy to try to like get the enforcers in a position where they might be vulnerable. Seems like that. And they're like, who the hell does he think he is? The creepy thing is that he shows up while he was as Talisman. Like, how did that work? How did that happen? And then it's him, yeah. And he like, you won't be Spooky Boogie again. Like, how did he have the computer? How was he Talisman? How did that work? But he like chokes her out. Like, what the fudge? Oh, that is disturbing. Like, binds her and she's dead. And he's like, that woman isn't suited to be Spooky Boogie. Huh. But Spooky Boogie shouldn't disappear. So yeah, 1984, George Orwell. So we don't need her to disappear because then she can't, we don't want to get the internet, roused up with the deaths of these two major avatars. So we need to keep them around, but they weren't fit to be the avatars there, which is very creepy, very disturbing. So 1984 is one of my favorite books by George Orwell. It is one of my favorite books because it's freaking terrifying. The entire concept of the book was written in the 1950s. The concept of the book is talking about the future, and it is scarily accurate. It's talking about there being like high surveillance over populations of people and people being surveyed what they do every day in everyday life. Not that like that happens in real life. It also talks about like speech being dumbed down to like text speech where we shorten words and say things like OMG and stuff like that ruins language and communication and critical thinking and things that have certainly not happened in the last 20 or 30 years. It's creepy, but it also talks about like a society where everyone orchestrates and works within the society. And if you try to act outside the system, you are targeted and you are either killed or you are brainwashed to be even more indoctrinated into the system. So it's like one of these things like where you either end up getting killed because you couldn't function within the system, or they brainwash you to be an even better, more compliant person within the system, which is terrifying, right? And that seems to be kind of tying to this system and this setup where if you don't act within the system, if you don't do what the system says, you're either killed or you are used by the system as a dog. The George Orwell 1984 influence is there, and it's creepy, and I'm fascinated by the fact that Shogo's reading it. Like, 'cause Shogo seems to be the anarchist that's acting outside the system, right? I'll keep Spooky Boogie around and eliminate the woman behind her. With all the equipment, nope, leaving no trace. And then we see Shogo, and we see that man and Migo there. And they're like literally going to kill the woman, and they have the tape and the stuff on the floor. You can play a perfect Spooky Boogie better than Shoko Sugawara herself. Just like you could become a perfect talisman better than Kimihiko Hayama. Oh my God. I'll give you your justice before you destroy and get destroyed. Oh, that's the sign. Yeah, that's the ED kicking in. Oh my God. The whole thing, I'm like, that whole blender with the tomatoes was just so they could not show us that girl getting killed. Oh my God. So this guy, Mito, is supposedly going to pose as both Talisman and Spooky now. Again, I'm a little bit worried because now if Akane tries to interact with Spooky, she could be actually helping Shogo and them get more information about the enforcers, which is problematic. It's like basically, again, it gives me a Death Note vibe of the idea of working with the enemy when the enemy's right in front of you. So I'm going to be really curious. I'm going to be very curious to see if in the next episode, I'm going to be super curious to see in the next episode if we keep with the storyline and we try to like track down Mito and prevent them from killing other people. Because typically it seems like what we found in this episode is that 3's a charm. We had the one guy, he killed 3 people in the factory and then the enforcers got him. Is Mito going to try to kill a 3rd person and that leads the enforcers to finding him? Is that going to be the case? It also points out that people who have the tendency to kill one person tend to repeat that course of action in the future. We've not seen Matsuoka kill anybody. We've just seen them stun them, but Kogami's killed. So there's that. Like, he's not hesitant to do it. I love the relationship that's developing between Akane and Kogami and her trying to understand them, but Matsuoka and Genoza being like, you don't really want to understand him because you might fall into the same trap as him. And I want to know more about Genoza and Kogami and Matsuoka's past, which I think we will at some point. Shogo, I feel like Shogo is not necessarily obsessed with Kogami, but maybe will become as... Now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like the scene from episode 1 is from the future. It seems like Kogami knows that Shogo is responsible for some reason why he's maybe a dog. He's going after him. Shogo may not realize this, but I feel like once Shogo and Kogami meet officially, then it's going to lead up to the next scene where we see from episode 1 of them facing off against one another, which is fascinating to me. But this episode was so good about delving into some very real world applicable things with technology and society that I was like, oh, okay. I didn't think about that, but yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up 10 years prior. So yeah, I'm very intrigued to know your thoughts down below. I'm really enjoying this series. It's very fascinating. I love Akane's character. She's wonderful. She's a really good protagonist. I love Matsuoka and Kogami. They're so mysterious. I want to know more. And Shogo is fascinating as a villain because he has a very Moriarty, a very mastermind presence. And I want to see more of him and know more about, like, what is he trying to do with the system. So in the meantime, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Psychopaths. Bye!